podcasts. Why did it have to be podcasts? Yes, welcome back, everyone, to this newest episode of the Silver Screen podcast. It's been a week without an episode, but we are back with another review to coincide with a big release. Believe it or not, we're almost, I think, at episode 50 of the podcast now. But, you know, it's not the age, it's the mileage, isn't it? As they say. It's not the years, it's the mileage. Oh, I misquoted. That's... nah. Bad Mike. Anyway, so I am your usual host, Michael Wilson. I'm back, as always, in the hosting chair. I'm joined by my usual co-host, who I will, be asking to throw me the whip or the idol, and we'll see which one he chooses. DK.
Adios, senor.
And we are joined by the appropriate, I guess, Marcus Browny to our little group. Stephen Brown, our guest for this week.
I was going to call myself the bull there, but fair enough, I'll take Brody.
Maybe you should be our Sallah, actually. That's kind of a nicer role for you. So, yeah. But he'll be keeping an eye out for any bad dates while we do this recording. So, if you haven't guessed from all... Oh yeah, if you haven't guessed from all those references and the fact it's written on screen today, in honor of the release coming up of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, we are going to be reviewing the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, because that's what it's called on screen, despite people trying to claim it has Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
The new 4K release has put it back to just Raiders.
It already is. It's on my Blu-ray release. It still just calls it Raiders, and it does on screen anyway. But yeah, it's weird how a lot of the sets to try and match up don't have that. But anyway, I mean, it's a nitpick and a half to complain, but you know what we're like. We,
Oh my God, Joel's made an early appearance this week.
Exactly, yeah. We still call 1977 Star Wars and not A New Hope, because that's what it was called. Nitpicking aside, we're ready to talk all things Indy. So... three of us here have all seen the movie. I think we're all, we all have a bit of a history with it, which we might get into. But first of all, before we start getting into the bigger review sections of the podcast, we always start with a little behind the scenes, which always falls to the purview of DK. So we're all sitting like Porkins in a classroom waiting to be briefed. DK?
I know you love me, Mike. There's no need to write on your eyelids. Come on.
Oh my word! References abound. I did try to find something to, accompany your behind-the-scenes section, DK. But John Williams, it ain't. But just this is what I've got to work with, courtesy of StreamYards. So here we go. This is the needle drop you've got. So take it away with the behind-the-scenes.
This is a very different Raiders of the Lost Ark, dude. This is like porn territory. Yeah,
this is Raiders of the Lost Arse.
I'm going to say Raiders of the Lost Pork.
Oh, yours is better.
I'm on the wrong podcast.
All right. I mean, if you're a huge fan of the Indiana Jones movies, Raiders in particular, then most of this, the Star Wars references, Paul Freeman and The Fly, etc., it'll be known to you, so I'm not going to go into that. But for those of you who have had your head stuck in the sand, no pun intended, for the last 4 decades, there's a few things here that may interest you. Now, George Lucas originally came up with the idea while working on what was then simply called Star Wars. Nice little fly back there. Both he and Spielberg were on vacation in Hawaii in 1977. Spielberg taking time out after finishing post-production on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, while Lucas wanted to get away from the general release of Star Wars, convinced it would bomb. Now, while lounging on the beach that week, the pair began to wonder what they wanted to do next. Spielberg mentioned to Lucas that he'd always wanted to do a James Bond film. Apparently, Cubby Broccoli consistently turned him down for that. However, Lucas promised him that he had that beat with an idea of his own that he had based on the Saturday matinee serials he loved as a child, not to mention, no small influence by the Charlton Heston movie Secret of the Incas, featuring a new character, Indiana Smith, named after the Steve McQueen character Nevada Smith from the movie of the same name. Obviously, that name was changed just before shooting on the insistence of Spielberg. Now, Lucas saw the character as a playboy of sorts, more akin to James Bond, which explains some of the more dubious choices in the original script, whereas Spielberg wanted to play up the more academic nature of the character. though briefly pondered making him an alcoholic. Despite the pair of them, Lucas and Spielberg, being attached, the idea was turned down by almost every studio in Hollywood. It was only after some serious persuasion that Paramount decided to take a chance on it. However, even at that point, Spielberg saw it as nothing more than a B-movie. Probably explains why I love it. Now, everyone and their uncle knows by this point that Tom Selleck was offered the role, but had to turn it down due to his commitment to the Magnum P.I. series. But several other actors were also considered for the role, including Nick Nolte, Tim Matheson, Bill Murray, Chevy Chase, and even Steve Martin. I know we've had a good 40 years of Ford in the role, but some of those names, I just can't. Doesn't stop there, however. Up for the possible role of Marion were Deborah Winger, Mary Steenburgen, Sean Young, Jane Seymour, and Dee Wallace, who Spielberg cast later as Elliot's mother in 1982's E.T. John Rhys-Davies wasn't the first choice for the role of Sallah. That honour went to the one and only Danny DeVito, who was then starring in the successful sitcom Taxi. Unfortunately, like Selleck, DeVito couldn't get out of his commitment to the show and was required to drop out, which saw the role ultimately go to Davis. Wasn't a total loss for DeVito, though, who eventually, like Selleck with 1983's High Road to China, managed to bust his adventuring cherry with 1984's Romancing the Stone. Although, nowhere near as successful as Raiders, for a clone, it has its own fair share of fans. Elsewhere, this was Alfred Molina's first officially credited screen role, and while Ronald Lacey turns in a memorable role as the now iconic Toad, he wasn't the first choice for the role. Spielberg originally wanted German actor Klaus Kinski. Kinski was less than flattered, however. When turning down the role, he called Lawrence Kasdan's original Raider script, and I quote, a yawn-making, boring pile of shit. Now, the scene where Toad produces a supposed torture device only to turn it into a hanger for his jacket, it's a reused gag from one of Spielberg's rare flops, 1984, which Christopher Lee plays a German officer who intends to torture Slim Pickens aboard a German U-boat. The gag fell flat with test audiences, and it was removed from the theatrical cut of that movie, although it can be seen in the deleted scenes, and Spielberg was able to put it to more effective use in Raiders. It's all news by now to anyone with more than a cursory interest in this movie that one of the most beloved scenes, the one where Indy shoots the swordsman, was down to Harrison Ford being ill due to the local diet during filming. After failing to get the scene correct due to his being uncomfortable, Ford asked Spielberg why he couldn't just shoot the sucker, with Spielberg agreeing to see how it would play. It's pretty common knowledge at this point. It wasn't just Ford himself that was having these kinds of issues, however, as at some point or other, most of the cast and crew became unwell due to the same issues, the diet. One of the only people to avoid this problem was Spielberg himself. Spielberg was apparently so fussy when it came to food that he almost exclusively ate SpaghettiOs during the location shoot. Even so, he still calls it one of his worst location experiences. Now, while filming the plane fight sequence, the wheel of the plane ran over Ford's left leg, tearing the cruciate ligament. Now, wary of Tunisian healthcare, Ford simply opted to wrap his knee in ice when not shooting and carry on. And one of the biggest questions raised among those viewing the movie is just how Indy survives the trip on the German U-boat as it travels to the island towards the climax of the movie. A deleted scene reveals that the sub, as was common practice when not in combat, never actually submerged, with Indy tying himself to the periscope for the duration of the journey. Spielberg thought the scene looked clunky, though, and had it removed, believing the average viewer would not think to deal with the logistics of the setup. God, how little he knew. However, it did remain in both the novelization and the comic book adaptation. And finally, the finale saw the censors originally reward the movie with an R rating, which is, would have hampered the box office when compared with more family-friendly fare. Not so much the melting faces of Toad and Dietrich, but it was down to Belloc's exploding head, which included some liver as well as other animal meat. To hammer the exploding cranium home. In the end, to secure a PG rating, Spielberg had to add flames around the head during that scene to disguise the gore. And that's what I've got for this week.
Okay, thank you very much for that, DK. That's knocked out about 20% of my notes, which I don't know why I made, as if I doubted that you would know a lot of those things. But yeah, because some interesting facts there. And yeah, I don't think everyone might necessarily know these things. Excuse me. I will say once you know that thing about like Harrison Ford ad-libbing the just shooting the sword guy, you look at his face, you can see the guy's in pain. That's a man who's been leaking from the anus for several hours. Right there. Yeah, everyone just looks like they've had enough. They're exhausted. But, yeah, okay, well, that's touched on a lot of stuff. Just to quickly go over the kind of podcast that we are, in case this is your first time, and just to brief everyone, we don't really do just a generic sort of summary of the film or a breakdown of the plot, because that would get a bit boring. So we split it into sections like writing and plot, acting, directing, VFX, sound and music, and just generic other. Then we finish with our favorite character moment and line. We hear from the audience, and we give our conclusion on a score out of 5 stars. So with that in mind, the first thing I wanted to look at, just to mix things up a little bit, would be the writing and the overall plot of this movie. So, with the exception of the stuff that TK just mentioned, Steve, have you got anything that you wanted to bring up on the writing and the plot before we dive deeply into it?
No. I'm not that critical of it at all, unfortunately. I watch it for the entertainment.
That's fair enough. And what about you, DK? Anything you haven't already mentioned?
Not really. I mean, it's got a great pace to it. It's got some, as I mentioned, it's got some dubious lines, which no doubt you'll want to dive into, as it were. But and I don't like the fact that there are some leaps of logic that one has to take. But other than that, I think it's a pretty decent script. It's got some good ad-libbing in there as well.
I'm intrigued what you mean. I'm not sure I necessarily picked up on any bad lines. And when it comes to leaps of logic, I probably just either didn't notice or hand waved a few of them away.
Oh, just little things. It's other than the sub, it's mostly just little things. Other than the Amy Farrah Fowler thing that we'll know that.
Well, that was literally the first thing I was going to bring up, because we may as well, because we kind of have to. But yeah, this idea, I think it was started by someone like Cracked.com or whatever, and then made popular in an episode of The Big Bang Theory, as put forward by Marion, by Alex's character, that the film would be no different if Indiana Jones wasn't involved, and he makes no impact or no real effect on it whatsoever. So where do we stand on that? Do we agree with that, or do we see the issues here, or the point? What do we think?
Well, I mean, they would have found it anyway, so at least they got it out of enemy hands, because they, obviously they got it back to the States at some point.
Yeah, but all that would have happened would be, just to play devil's advocate for a second, the Nazis would open it and all die, which they did anyway. So arguably the only role that Indy had was having, being somebody that was there at the end to go, like, come and pick me up, US, and take this incredibly dangerous super weapon.
I mean, but They could have. It could have been sat in a warehouse in Germany at some point.
Yeah,
that's pretty much it as far as it goes.
Yeah, I see. I and just to to reverse my position of just then, I don't think it matters, because it's not about that, for example. And I'm always it's the journey rather than the destination kind of thing. And the whole point is that Indy is the central character, so you can't really say he has no impact on the movie, because he has impact for himself and on a personal level. And for me, it's that journey. It's his reconciling with Marion, reigniting his love for archaeology and stuff. It's us seeing his what he gets up to, whether it be day-to-day professoring or going out on digs and archaeological things, and the love of that. His relationship with Belloc, the kind of rivalry they have, and how kind of entertaining and interesting that is. These are all things that matter, without being a question of, well, if you take him out of the plot, it wouldn't matter, because besides which, I mean, even without him,
do that to a lot of classic movies.
Yeah, of course.
You're going to go down that rabbit hole. So I don't know why this gets the brunt of that kind of criticism.
I think it's just because it was made popular in a very widely viewed sitcom. But I mean, and just to to bring it down to their level for a second, one has to assume the Nazis were aware of Abner Ravenwood and would have been headed to Marion's bar anyway. And if Indy wasn't there, God knows what happens in that scene. So, even if it's just a question of saving the girl and not having her horribly branded and tortured, better than nothing, shall we say?
Yeah.
So, any thoughts on that from you, Steve? Any agreement or?
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy one to sum up. Yeah, everyone would have been dead. Someone else, probably still the Germans, would have found the Ark again. They may have tried again or took it back to Germany. The only real difference is the Americans got it and put it in, a warehouse, be looked after by top minds.
Yeah, as it turns out, it was Area 51. It was located, as we would find out in a later movie, which unfortunately we can't pretend doesn't exist because it does. But anyway, so yeah, the next thing I have to bring up, it's going to be a little uncomfortable, but we have to because you know that's what we're here to do. Is this whole situation about Marion's age that's been popping up lately more and more? It's not really necessarily in the movie in the text itself, which is why it never really bothered me or I never really noticed it. But it is made very explicit in the novelization, unfortunately, and it has some pretty horrific comments from George Lucas about it, which I think DK found, unfortunately.
Yeah, I went into, I think it was about 3 or 4 days ago, this came up, and I just dumped this massive theory on Mike as to why this probably doesn't mean what everybody's saying it means. And Mike says, no, I'll try and find it. So I looked it up myself, and I came away with a really bad taste in my mouth. That original script meeting transcription between George Lucas and Lawrence Kasdan is not great reading, to be honest.
Yeah. To give you in case you're not aware, to give you the sort of breakdown of the situation, although it's never really stated what age anybody is in the movie, supposedly Marion is meant to be 25 and Indy's meant to be around 28, 29, and mentions that they haven't seen each other in 10 years, so that they had a relationship 10 years ago. And you don't have to be Carol Vorderman to work out that 10 years off 25 would make Marion 15 when they had a relationship. So
I mean, it's kind of even worse in the transcription. I know Lucas wanted him to be some kind of playboy, and he kind of got his wish later on when it came to the young Indiana Jones. But in that original kind of script discussion, he thought it would be amusing if she was about 11 or 12. And I was, oh, God, good grief. No.
Yeah. You can kind of see the genesis of Padme and Anakin, as I mentioned to you there, the whole 8-year-old and 14-year-old falling in love situation. But yeah, I mean, there is also, after that initial thing was quite rightly shot down in flames, there is also a conversation between Lucas and Spielberg where Lucas kind of insists on the whole 15 is, it's fine, different time, it's the 20s and whatever. And Spielberg was still just like, well, why not just make a 16 then, or 18, or why not? It could have happened 5 years ago or 2 years ago. Lot can happen in 2 years, whatever, But Lucas insisted that no, she had to have been 15 years old for whatever reason, and just in case anybody does jump into the comments, I will repeat what was heard on another podcast. So with respect to Mr. Sunday Movies, who said this, first of all, remember that you are defending fictional characters and a horrible thing before you jump into the comments defending this. So, just keep some perspective.
Yeah. I'm glad Spielberg got his way. I mean, for every good idea that George Lucas has had, he's had some pretty doozy bad ones.
Yeah, definitely. But as I say, the merciful part of it is that there's nothing necessarily within the film that would make you aware of this controversy, at least in the film itself. Like I said, the novelization is a different story, but as watching the film, it never occurred to me. I never noticed. And it's just the sort of thing that's, for whatever reason, popped up and become part of the zeitgeist over the last few years, to the point that even Karen Allen has had to comment on it in interviews and stuff. And, if you look around, there are massive headlines of the interviews of like, Karen Allen insists Indiana Jones is not a pedophile. And I'm like,
I'm going to go with her explanation for it.
Yeah,
nothing's definitely down unless you're reading the novelization. So, and you can't really always take those as
no, definitely not. No, and it doesn't bother me because I can just ignore that supposedly not needing to be the fact. Because as I said, at the end of the day, Spielberg didn't include anything on screen to firmly state anybody's age, so it doesn't bother me. Only because I can ignore the fact that that's what Lucas wanted and that's what supposedly is the case. So, yeah. Were you even aware of any of this controversy, Steve, or is this news to you?
No, absolutely not. I mean, it does put across in that she was young, but it doesn't quite go into that.
Yeah, there are still some lines that are a bit dodgy that I kind of wish I didn't have, like the whole, oh, you took advantage, I was a child. I could live without, to be honest with you. Although, she could have been exaggerating. We can kind of hand wave that away in that way as well. But
well, like I said to you in that discussion, it, I could have, because of the times and age, I could see him referring to, a 17-year-old and 18-year-old as a child at that point. And that's how that's my headcanon. That's how I prefer to look at things.
That's the thing. I mean, in America, you're not an adult till you're 21. So it gives you even more leeway to be like, she could have been 20 and still think I was just a child. So again, you can get away with a lot there. But yeah, as I said, at the end of the day, very weird situation, but thankfully not anything that has to bog down the movie. And we can now move on from it, having dealt with it. So, with that unpleasantness,
that means they give guns to children. Oh God!
and I think that's the least of their worries. I will mention, since you brought it up, I will mention that there's one scene in which Indiana Jones looks at a gun before throwing a completely different gun in a suitcase. So, oops. And he has a particular make of gun. I forget what. It's one of the Walther family of guns, which, although it was technically in use by the British Army, had only been introduced 2 months earlier, and he's not British. So technically he shouldn't have that either. But, you know, don't give them to kids. That's bad. Like I said, I'm here to be the annoying nitpicker on occasion, but I won't do that anymore. I just wanted to bring that up. And yeah, speaking of annoying nitpicking and overly wokeness, which you've come to expect from us for now, how are we still comfortable watching this, knowing that Indiana Jones is just basically robbing other cultures to put stuff in museums? It doesn't sound great when you kind of break it down, does it?
I guess we're looking at it from today's lens, but it's you know, it is what it is. It's an adventure serial. It's very much of its time, and I can kind of, you know, without trying to sound, you know, dismissive of it, I can kind of hand wave that away while I'm watching this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little culturally insensitive, and it gets worse. Weirdly enough, it gets worse and better in, I was going to say the sequel, but it's a prequel in Temple of Doom, because you have some incredible cultural insensitivity, like really bad. There's blackface, there's horrible depictions of another culture. But then at the end, you at least have Indiana Jones being like, maybe I shouldn't take this object from the starving village after all. So yeah, it's a weird mixed bag of a situation there. But like I said, that is churlish. That's more of a just me mentioning like, yeah, it's not great, but you know, this is the times they were living in, and you've got to have adventures somehow. And yeah, as I said, if we start looking into that too heavily, then as I mentioned to DK, you've got to ask yourself who it was that set all these traps, then managed to get out without tripping any of them.
Yeah, you can get bogged down in this kind of thing. I mean, there's little things like where Belloc takes his gun, he goes to the next scene, and he's also got his whip, and I don't know.
You don't need to spell out everything.
Yeah, right down in this. Why didn't I see this? Why didn't I see this? And yeah, I think it's just. I think it's one of those films. It's best you just sit back and enjoy it. And if you do that, it's yeah.
Because I mean, these things don't really affect anything in the larger sense, and yeah, it certainly doesn't make anything come off wrong or bad or errors or whatever. But yeah, anyway. A lot of my notes, I think, were stuff you already mentioned. Obviously, you said it was set in 1936 because it's a kind of throwback to those Old Republic serials and the Charlton Heston movie that they ripped off Indy's entire look from. I forget the name of it now. Sorry, did you have it written down? That's the one. Yeah. So very similar to that. But I will say I did notice, having heard just a few weeks ago that it was Spielberg's desire to direct a Bond movie, but, you know, you kind of had to be British until quite recently to do that. There is a very James Bond-like structure to this that I kind of noticed with that in mind. Because when you think about it, the temple idol scene is very much your pre-credits James Bond on an adventure movie. Then you have the kind of briefing with M, which is actually like the guys in the hall of the whatever college explaining the situation and what the staff of Ra or whatever it is and everything, and then going off on the adventure in the various set pieces and globetrotting around the world. There's even a kind of a Bond girl, although I would, you know, that's very reductive for the character of Marion in particular. But yeah, it's kind of weird that it still echoes that structure pretty well, I would think. Do you guys think the same, or is that just me reading too much into it?
I don't know. I think it's kind of dismissive of Karen Allen. I can see your point. It's dismissive of Karen Allen to regard her as a kind of a Bond girl figure. I think she's by far the best actress that we've had in the entire saga. And yes, I am including Cate Blanchett in that. I just think Marion as a character was great. And no offense to Kate Capshaw, but it was such a downgrade when Willie was the second one.
Well, again, to quote Family Guy, lady only here because she humping director. So, but yeah, I mean, I would. I will say that obviously Marion is the best of Indiana Jones's love interests. But after writing that down, I was like, yeah, but the competition is Willie the Screamer or a literal Nazi. So, like,
Yeah. Well, if you're going to count young Indiana Jones, he had his fair share. How this guy did not end up with syphilis before Raiders is beyond me.
I know you've been watching Young Indiana Jones and enjoying it, DK, but I have to point out it's not canon. He has a daughter and not a son in that.
No. The bookends aren't canon. The movies themselves are now canon.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. How does that work?
Well, when it first was released, obviously each one had a bookend with George Hall, apart from Mystery of the Blues, which was bookended with a Harrison Ford adventure. Lucas decided, no, he doesn't want that. So after Last Crusade, he took all the movies, removed the bookends, apart from the Harrison Ford one. I don't know if he's got something against, older actors, same as he did with Sebastian Shaw. But yeah, he got rid of all those bookends. Kind of tied a couple of loose themed episodes together and put them in chronological order. And the movies, as they also filmed extra movies, they are now considered canon. But the bookends have now been, apart from, as I said, the Harrison Ford one, they've kind of all been thrown on the trash heap.
Oh, fair enough. I can't say I'm particularly all that interested or have ever seen the Young Indy stuff. I just know that it was something you've been diving deep into. So,
honest to God, compared to the first trilogy, they don't come close. And some of them, I like them now, but I cannot for the life of me think what possessed them to think a kid growing up who brought up on Temple of Doom and Last Crusade would have sat there and enjoyed them, because there's just nothing there for the most part. But some of them are really good, and the later ones, especially with Sean Patrick Flanery, and I consider, obviously, they're better than Crystal Skull.
I can't really judge having not seen them, but I think as soon as I found out it was edutainment, I was like, no, stop trying to teach me things and disguising it. Yeah.
Max, you just don't like learning shit, do you? Let's be fair.
I don't mind learning. I don't need to be lied to. Don't do it in what's perfectly good an adventure movie, Anyway, the next sort of point that I wanted to bring up, other than the fact that I have in my notes the hilarious sentence, "Oh, look, there's a snake on a plane." Oh,
good.
Had to drive that in somewhere. What do you guys think? This is a heck of a question about the Christian iconography that's used in this movie. Not necessarily just Christian. There's obviously the Jewish ritual and everything as well, but certainly this movie relies heavily on the Old Testament usage of the actual ark and what it is and what it represents, and even the the power, the glory of God destroying these Nazis at the very end. So how do you feel about that? And do you think it works? Steve, let's come to you first.
just yes. It's a movie.
Just yes.
It's the thing.
Yeah.
Yes. I didn't even think about it until you said it.
Really? Because I would counter that in a bizarre situation, the worst Indiana Jones movies are the ones that don't use religious iconography. Like Temple of Doom and Crystal Skull avoid it, and they're not as good, weirdly. So
I mean, whole Kalimar thing's probably some sort of pseudo-religious thing, but yeah.
I mean, is it? But yeah.
It certainly seems that way. But yeah, I mean, it's just a mechanic to get you there and a reason for this to happen. They could have changed that with aliens, like they did in the fourth one. Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't bother me, just to clarify, even as a person of faith, it doesn't bother me at all. If anything, I'm kind of glad that there's a level of representation that accepts that God exists and is fine with that concept, and, destroys evil. So, yay. But what about you, DK?
I will posit that the aliens and the Shankara stones, they're just as much kind of pulpy ideas as the religious iconography. It's what you do with the movie around it. And I think as far as MacGuffins go, they're really well done in the Indiana Jones, the original trilogy at least. They're not just an object to be sought out. They do actually play into the narrative as it goes along. Obviously, as you mentioned, you've got Old Testament stuff here. You've got the kind of New Testament in Last Crusade. I think when it came to Temple of Doom, they looked back at Raiders and thought, okay, where did we go wrong and what can we take from the first one? And I think that's why you've got a lot of the same kind of imagery in Last Crusade as you do in Raiders, because they kind of struck gold in this. It's got a kind of, I'm not particularly religious myself, but having gone to school and stuff, I mean, I don't know if kids learn any kind of religion kind of thing, or if it's not allowed these days with the multicultural diversity that we have in the country these days. But yeah, I knew about the Ark of the Covenant, but I mean, we learned about it in school, but the only reason I actually knew about the Ark of the Covenant is because of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And it's there. It's to some people they're real items. To some people they can be ascribed to myth or legend. And I like that. They don't give a definitive answer.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain the ending if it's just a myth, though. That's the
thing.
No,
because there's not necessarily the commandments in there. It could be anything.
But what's the power that destroys them?
It could be anything. It could be Captain Bob sat on a cloud somewhere going, I don't like these Nazis. They're a bunch of wankers. You can't, you each, again, as I've said with each film that we review, you each bring your own personal experiences to it. And some people could ascribe, as I say, you have faith in this kind of thing, so you could attribute it to that. And I'm not particularly religious, but I can say, God. Some people may watch it and think, no, it's nothing to do with that.
Yeah. Well, you could. You could just look at it as well. I don't have to ascribe God or any other meaning to it. It's just a supernatural force.
Yeah.
And that's as much as you need. Or maybe you believe in some form of an afterlife, and that's why they kind of look like literally souls, because you came from the well of souls. You could just have it as this was somehow, some ancient person, I guess, captured souls of people that were in torment, or killed people and captured their souls, whatever. You can. Well,
exactly. I'm not. As great as Spielberg is, I wouldn't say Raiders is on the same level as Bergman's Seven Seals. So it's not there for you to read that much into it. Personally, I would have thought.
No, and I'm not saying that it is, but for me, it is just kind of. I don't know, without wanting to sound overly, annoying to everyone, it's kind of nice to have that kind of, whether you believe it or whether you see it as a myth, to have that kind of thing still existing, because a lot of my education wasn't from school or Sunday school, as Indy says. It was from movies like The Top Nest and 10 Commandments, or the old greatest story ever told in the Bible and stuff. My mum used to love all those, so we kind of, partly because, we were a Catholic family, but partly because you just like those movies, and I like that survives in here, and that they're not afraid to go to it. Whereas I think nowadays a lot of movies would just be too skittish to do it. Yeah, and it would be. It's kind of a shame.
Well, when you look at things like His Dark Materials, when they adapted that into Golden Compass, and they gave themselves an impossible task, because they were trying not to put any religious connotations to it, and it's just impossible. But as you say, you learn these things not necessarily in school, or if you don't have faith in a church kind of thing. I mean, we looked at Norse mythology at school, and the only reason I knew Norse mythology was through my goddamn Thor comics.
Yeah, Stanley did a lot of work to bring the Norse mythology into the modern mindset.
Yeah. I think,
and Greek, actually, come to think of it, a lot of Greek stuff. I mean, on a similar level. Not that I'm saying it's the same thing as somebody who believes one thing over the other, but if you do believe it's all a myth, then even things like Jason and the Argonauts or Clash of the Titans, which the Indiana Jones films are not a million miles away from in terms of kind of adventure serials.
So, there was that kind of. There was already that kind of underlying prevalence in the movies at that time with the Harryhausen things, as you mentioned. And Raiders, I mean, for better or worse, it was one of those films that, gave us a deluge of, really bad knockoffs. I remember watching an Italian one called Treasure of the Four Crowns, and it looked amazing on the screen. But when you see bats being dangled by wires, this is a level above. And I think. Yeah. Just as an aside, as MacGuffins go, they work in these movies. A couple of weeks ago, I watched what we were talking about earlier. I watched Mission Impossible 3. And in Mission Impossible 3, there's a MacGuffin in there. Unfortunately, the whole thing is a J.J. Abrams thing. So you never actually find out what...
so it's a mystery box then.
It is. It's basically A to B. Everybody's after this MacGuffin called the Rabbit's Foot. It has a biohazard stamp on the side. It's never explained what it is. It's never explained what it does. It's just used as a throwaway thing for people to chase after. And I think where the Indiana Jones movies gets it right is that they make these things essential and they make them interesting. No cinema audience is going to care one iota for something that they've got no interest in, don't know anything about, and it just kind of it marks it out as just a really kind of flawed narrative. And I think where they place these MacGuffins in the Indiana Jones films, it's intrinsically interesting to the narrative. They serve a purpose, and I think it works in these films. And as I say, this one and Last Crusade especially.
I think as well, it's kind of a masterstroke to have set them in the past because it avoids what became increasingly the case in any kind of action adventure movie from the 80s onwards, which is the MacGuffin was always something to do with computers or something around the lines of like, oh, they've got this codex that they can plug it in and they'll wipe out all computers and the world will collapse. Yeah. And it's just kind of like, you can only see that so many times until you're like, oh God, another one. Yeah. Who keeps inventing these things that can collapse the entire internet or whatever, you know? But no, I like
it was released a social media platform.
As it turns out, speaking of Nazis, but no, that's cool. That's fair enough. Any thoughts, Steve? Before, because I don't want to railroad you. I was aware we didn't really come together.
Right on.
Awesome. I would say just going back to the opening scene in the temple and the idol itself. I really love, this is such an obvious thing to say, but I love the idea of swapping it out for something that weighs the same amount, because that's the kind of really basic, obvious shit that just never occurs to me. Like, I'd be a crap Indiana Jones because I'd be sat there for like 3 days trying to work out how to get rid of this thing without triggering a trap. And I also like that it just doesn't even work. Like, of course it doesn't. You can't just immediately, it's still been off the weight or whatever even for a millisecond. Of course it doesn't bloody work. But I kind of love that. I love that thing. And that whole scene is just iconic. I mean, isn't it? The traps and the boulder and the betrayal thing, as I mentioned, it's just so good. As an opening to a film, it's how you grab your audience, isn't it, really?
It's beautiful. It's like a lesson in movie making. I think this is Spielberg. He's in his best period.
Yeah, well, I personally, I lean more towards the 90s, but I see what you're saying. It's
I know why, mate. I know why that is.
You don't even see his face. He's just bigger, of almost menace in a way, because he's going through doing all these things. People are handing him paper, and then he shoots the guy or the gun out. So he uses the whip to get the gun out of the guy's hand, and you're like, ooh, badass.
No, that's one of my notes actually in the direction. So that's well noticed, Steve. I'd noticed the same thing. It's not so much a figure of menace as a figure of reverie. Like, look, like you said, you're not looking directly at him. You see him from behind in the opening shot, even though he's framed front and center. Despite the advice that John Ford apparently gave Spielberg about placing the camera places. Hey, reference to anybody that saw the Fablemans there. So you see him from behind, you see him in the shadow and everything. And even after he's done that, saving his life, whipping a gun out, he is revealed emerging from the shadows in that heroic way that's been going ever since, I guess, Touch of Evil back in the 40s. So, he's given that significance and that prominence by Spielberg's direction, which of course he is. He is the central figure, even though they forgot to put his name in the title of this one. So, awesome. And I mean, I will say there's a few too many bizarre, corpses on traps gore in that scene for me. It went a little bit. But then again, you look at it by comparison to the snake pit scene later on with the thousands of corpses that Marion walks through, and you're like, actually, that was quite conservative, sticking to about 3. So never mind.
You compare this to Temple of Doom, and it's like an episode of Play School.
Oh, yeah. Which is weird, because Temple of Doom's the one that nobody really remembers the big, moment that sticks in your brain as a kid, because it was always the end of this and the end of Last Crusade. Those are the ones that you're like, did it scar you? Did it intrigue you? But it definitely stuck in your memory of what was done. Even though looking at them now, the special effects are not great, but they work. So whether it melting faces or just aging to death. And I think that was another thing where they kind of misstepped with Crystal Skull, is that they wanted to try and do something like that, and the terrible CGI Kate Blanchett's head exploding thing just doesn't work at all.
I think the overuse of CGI in Crystal Skull is what ruins it. I think the acting is good for the most part, although some characters are unnecessary. But, back during the original trilogy, it was mostly practical effects. And Yeah.
Yeah.
The amount of CGI in Crystal Skull, it just kind of gave it this layer of insincerity.
Yeah. And it's not that I've got anything against CGI. It's just that when it's not used well or it's overused, it's not good. Like anything else, it can be used badly, and I think that was an example where it was. And as you're saying, even though we can say that some of the stuff in these earlier movies looks dated, it also kind of looks great because it's practical in a few of those cases, you know. And
if you compare the truck scene, and they've all got one of these kind of set pieces in the Indiana Jones movies. You compare the truck scene, and you look at that, and it's amazingly directed and holds your attention from beginning to end. When you have that in Crystal Skull, it then gets interrupted. Just as you're settling into the groove of this adventure, you're constantly interrupted in that movie every so often by layers of CGI, and it just instantly takes you out of it.
Even from literally the very first shot, though, because this movie opens, to Stephen's point, with such a gorgeous transition where the Paramount logo mountain transitions into the mountain that you're looking at, and then Indy steps into the frame. And then Crystal Skull has it transform the Paramount logo into like a molehill, and then a terrible CGI gopher appear for no legitimate reason whatsoever.
Yeah, the damn prairie dogs. And then as I say, you've got that fantastic chase sequence in the jungle, and you're just getting into it. And then you've got that ludicrous monkey scene.
Yeah, Shia LaBeouf, friend to the monkeys. It's awful. Speaking of which, of Shia LaBeouf and monkeys, I did note there's a point in Raiders when Marion's kind of teasing Indy with the Nazi monkey, and she's like, "Oh, this is our baby. You don't think he's cute?" And I was like, "You know what? He's a better child of yours than Shia LaBeouf." So, despite being a monkey and a Nazi, I'd probably take him over Shia.
Dear.
That was just a joke. Everyone, calm down. Yes, Honey Boy was great. Calm down. I did like as well. I only have a couple of notes on the plot because, as I say, I think I put a lot of stuff under direction, which we'll get to. But the only other thing I had partly is that I love the idea of this. Sorry, forgive me, I don't know the character's name, but such a stereotypical Nazi that I just refer to him as that Allo Allo looking fuck. Come on, he is. You know, the one with the hat and the glasses. You know. Oh. I don't know what his name is. He looks like he should be threatening Gordon Kay. That's all I know. But yeah, speaking of him, although I don't love that he's such an obvious kind of stereotyped villain and like, oh yeah, this guy's he's a bad and he's gonna come a cropper in the end. I kind of love the genius idea that he burns his hand on the medallion during that bar scene because he was threatening to brand Marion, then got branded himself, which is the beautiful bit of poetic irony, and also it's kind of important to the plot that they know like that's what it looks like because it's burned into him. You know?
Yeah, there's a bunch of little things throughout the movie which then have a payoff towards the end. It was very well done.
Yeah, definitely. But it never feels like you're not watching it like, oh, that's going to become important later, in a way that you do with some movies. Yeah.
There's no obvious Chekhov's gun moment. It plays naturally, and as I say, I think this is why this era for me is Spielberg's best.
Yeah, as I say, I think the closest it gets to that is that whenever you see that Nazi guy on screen, you're like, well, he's going to come to a horrible end because you're building it up that we have to have that satisfaction moment or that, you know, comeuppance moment. But other than that, nothing's predictable, I would say, even in the movie. So yeah, and yes, the next thing I have any notes on in the plot is just the kind of the really sweet scene in the cabin with Indy and Marion, with the whole, you know, it's not the years, it's the mileage that I alluded to earlier, and them having a real moment, and then him just falling asleep. Because it's like that's a perfect, I think, summation of their screwball comedy partnering in the movie. Because it never quite works out for them, and yet there's clearly affection there, and they're either bickering or like he leaves her kidnapped so he doesn't get followed, and it's a perfect, for me, encapsulation of the, like I said, the likes of the screwball comedies, the His Girl Fridays and stuff of back in the day, you know?
I was just thinking about that.
Really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I thought, it's like, His Girl Friday, Cary Grant kind of thing going on.
Yeah, definitely. And it captures it so well because obviously Harrison Ford and Karen Allen, just fantastic actors anyway. So, yeah, speaking of which, I will move next on to the acting. But before I do that, do you guys have any other notes on writing or plot that I haven't touched on? No?
That come to mind.
Awesome. Well, we'll move to the acting then, and the first person we have to talk about is Harrison Ford. So again, Steve, I don't want to leave you not talking and us talking all the time. So thoughts on Harrison Ford in this movie? He's pretty crap, and he's not a great actor, I think, is what you're going to say.
Is that his name? Oh, right. I thought it was,
that's his name, isn't it? Yeah, he's not been in much.
No, he didn't do anything, really. He just didn't go any further from that, and must have replaced him in the second one. I can't remember.
Can you imagine?
God, yeah. No, I mean, it's one of his iconic roles, really. It's one that made him who he is today, in part.
Yeah. Where do you stand on it in terms of Harrison Ford's roles? Because perhaps controversially, I think it's his best role. I'd put it over Deckard and Han Solo, personally. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree. Star Wars is obviously part of that trio, and it's completely blanked what the one of the robots is.
Blade Runner, I did mention Deckard, yeah.
Where he may not be a replicant. But yeah, obviously that was an interesting one as well. That was very much story-driven Blade Runner over the character.
Yeah, and I mean,
it's certainly a good role for him personally, and he did well.
As you say, I think what hurts Deckard in Blade Runner for me is just the fact that we never know where we bloody stand with him, because they tried to deliberately, for whatever artsy reason, to make him vague. Like, is he even human or not? It's like, I can't be bothered with that.
Yeah, I'm with Harrison Ford on that. That didn't even come up until later with his bloody unicorn and his final cut.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but yeah. So DK, what about you? Sorry to put you on the spot, but what do you think of in terms of Ford's filmography? Where does Indiana Jones sit with you?
Ford has done some really, really good movies, and sorry out there if you're ever listening. I doubt it, but sorry, Mr. Ford, but he's done some pants stuff. But
I think he knows.
yeah. But when it comes to his most iconic roles, as much as I love him as Han Solo, it's Indiana Jones every time. To me, that is his standout role.
Oh,
and when it comes to Deckard, he apparently got the job as Deckard pretty much through this. Rather than I think the audition, they just sent several little clips from the rushes while they were filming this, and he got the job of Deckard just based on that alone.
Yeah, and I did. You didn't mention it in the behind the scenes, but I did hear from a different couple of sources that they almost didn't cast Harrison Ford because George Lucas didn't want to make it look like he was one of his continuing stable, or there was a bias there, because obviously he'd already been in Star Wars at this point as Han Solo, and before that he'd been in American Graffiti. So it was apparently a real struggle for Spielberg to allow him to be cast in the role, and you can't really imagine it without him now. They're struggling to think of ways to carry it on and try to pass the torch, because I don't know if it would necessarily work without him. I think it could, and your love of the young Indiana Jones, shows that as a franchise, it's obviously strong enough to manage. But yeah, it's going to be a heck of a challenge to replace him if and when they did want to carry it on.
I mean, he's down to the actor, and as much as I love, Tom Selleck. And, obviously hindsight's 2020. But if it had been Tom Selleck, no offense to the guy, I think he's a great actor, but I do not think we'd be talking about it all this time later.
No, I think it would have just gone down with a lot of the knockoffs and stuff, which aren't hugely well regarded, as you said. So, the romance and the stone jewel of the Nile type stuff that only very few of us have unfortunately sat through.
Have you ever seen High Road to China?
I haven't seen that one, no.
That is an adventure movie in this style, in this era, with Tom Selleck, and it's good. But the very fact that you've never seen it, the fact that a lot of people don't know what you're talking about, that says it all.
That's what I mean. I think there's so many that got lost in the cracks because a lot of people tried to make things like this between the three original trilogies, and they weren't very good. Although not necessarily the case that they're not good. It could just be that they weren't, big budget or popular enough. Because I will say that my favorite of the Indiana Jones knockoffs, and I know you'll appreciate this, DK, is the Librarian trilogy.
Oh, that's fantastic! I love those movies.
Yeah, those movies. They're clearly TV movies. They don't have a budget, and Noah Wyle isn't Harrison Ford, but they're pretty great little movies. I think. Yeah.
I think it comes down to obviously it's a personal thing with an actor, but let's be honest, as crotchety an old bastard as he is, he's infinitely charismatic in the roles that he plays.
Yeah, but more so, I think that's why I favor Indiana Jones. I think he's more charismatic, more relatable, and more believable in this than he is in the other roles. And I know that there'll be a lot of people screaming at us that none of us picked Han Solo, but to me, Han Solo is just a bit of a jerk. Like, he's not the kind of dude you'd want to be friends with because he seems so pompous and up himself. And I know the whole ad-libbed, I love you, I know thing and everything, but he just comes off as so arrogant that half of the time you're not sure whether you want to laugh with him or slap him.
Whereas... Oh, no, I love that. I love that. Maybe I've just got a thing for jerks, but yeah, I love it. As I say, don't get me wrong. If it wasn't for Indiana Jones, Han Solo would be at the top of that list because he by far is my favorite character. When it comes to Star Wars, when you're a kid, you identify with Luke. When you're later on in life and you're a bit more cynical, it's Han every time. So
I've always identified with Jabba myself, but I think that's just physical appearance more than anything.
Well, personally, it's to me it's Lando because I'm one smooth bastard. But yeah.
Oh, bless you. But no, I mean, it's not that I hate the character. It's just that Indiana Jones, to bring it back, is more, like I said, relatable and more like there's something about the fact that he's kind of a prototype John McClane in a way. Like, instead of all of these invincible action hero, you're never worried about them, they can do anything. You have that fantastic moment where he's like, I honestly don't know. I'm making it up as I go along, guys. I'm trying here. And even everything from, sorry.
I think that's what stands out when it comes to action heroes. We went through this phase in the 80s where they were all invincible. But when you look at the most popular ones, as you said, Harrison Ford and, Bruce Willis as John McClane and Daniel Craig's stint as Bond, they're all kind of flawed. When they get hit, you see that they get hit. They don't just, take a punch and then just keep going without bruises or, a busted lip.
Yeah, exactly. Indy always looks like, shit hurts. When he gets hit, it hurts. He's in pain, you know what I mean? Not even just in that scene where he's like, where doesn't it hurt? And he points to the elbow or something, which is pretty funny within itself. But he looks like he's been through it. And even when he has to find a way out of stuff, it never feels like a Deus Ex Machina or a cheat. So like, even when you're like, how's he going to get out of this horrible snake pit they're trapped in?
Even when it is literally a Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah, which, I mean, it is in a lot of ways, yeah, but yet it's somehow you don't mind. It's believable. You're fine with it because you're rooting for him, I guess, the whole way through. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm not sure it would have worked had Lucas got his entire way and he'd been a bit more of a, as the older folks say, a bounder.
Well, he would have just turned him into Han Solo 2.0 by the sounds of it.
Yeah, but with added paedophilia.
Exactly. And we don't need that. Yeah. But no, I mean, that there is a few things I want to shout out before we move on from Harrison Ford, though, which is that, like, even subtle things which give this character, again, a bit more depth than the Han Solo of it for me, which is like when he's inquiring if Marion's going to be there to Brody at the start, or when he realizes Marion's alive and he thought she wasn't. And there's a hint of vulnerability there that, Deckard and Han Solo just haven't got, really. I like that he has almost a kind of skeptic to believer type journey, because he starts the movie with, I don't believe in magic and all that myth and stuff, and ends it with, don't look, close your eyes, because something's happening. So, yeah. I kind of like that there's a bit of an arc there.
Yeah, I think they kind of undermine that a little with Temple of Doom.
Well, that's a prequel, so...
Well, I know, but, the fact that they undermined it by already introducing him to...
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
The voodoo and magical side of things. And then they just completely went batshit crazy in Indiana Jones, and I didn't go up against Dracula, so...
Really?
Oh yeah.
But when does that happen?
Masks of Evil. It's is
it a young Indy episode?
It's a young Indy, yeah. He goes up against Vlad.
Good Lord. As long as he's not played by Richard Roxburgh. Anyway.
Oh, God.
It's a callback to an off-air conversation, sorry. Anyway, so... yeah, and I do like, in terms of talking about, he's not invincible and that's kind of relatable and it makes you root for him more. I like that one of the iconic things that they give to the character is a fundamental fear of snakes. It's an actual flaw. And you're like, oh, yeah, cool, because how boring would it have been if it was like pit full of snakes? Psh, I'm not bothered by this. And instead you're like, ooh, shit. Ooh, why'd it have to be snakes indeed? Yes.
I love it. Make a rope.
I don't know if that would have worked. I'm guessing snakes probably wouldn't sit there patiently while you tied them together.
I know it's going back to the writing, but we didn't really go into so many good lines in this. Like, with the snakes and John Reese, delivery of, asps, very dangerous. You go first.
Yeah. John Rhys Davies has some great deliveries because, as I said earlier as well, the whole completely shocking when he just grabs it from midair and just goes, bad dates, because the monkey's been killed. I was like, that's a great little line delivery. 2 words, and that's all it takes. Or how, he kind of sings cheerily when they're winning on a couple of occasions, or he's, noticeably chuffed when Marion gives him the little congrats kiss at the end for everything. And it's like, oh, Sallah is the kind of
the sea.
A British tar is
It's even like in little character moments where he gets Bullock's name wrong and he goes, "Oh, they call him Balosh," and Harrison starts laughing. It's made up of these little moments that imbue it with a kind of realism, and I think that's what helps it work.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's one of the notes I've got later on, but it's something about world building because it populates it with characters who are believable and not just like plot functions or stereotypes or whatever. They are somehow, even in the smallest of roles, they're fleshed out characters. Even Doc Ock at the start of the movie, sorry, I forget the character's name. So that character in the intro, he barely has a function in the movie. He's not there all that long. And yet you go through the motions with him. It's like, oh, he's a cool dude. He's a friend. He's telling you, nobody's come out here alive and all about the superstitions and things. Then I was genuinely shocked when he betrayed him. Adios, senor, and all that. And then shocked again when he's just impaled on the, even though that dummy looked nothing like Alfred Molina, but still.
As you say, it's a masterclass in world building because in that few 10 minutes from the very first mountain peak to when he's on that plane with Jock, you pretty much pick up every single characteristic that Indy has. There's no exposition needed. It's a classic example of show, don't tell. And I think
exactly
it just makes it work.
That's even when it drops in the whole he's afraid of snakes thing, which again, when you think about it, comes from nowhere, has no point in being in that scene, but it nicely sets up for later when he's trapped in a pit full of the buggers.
Awesome. I'm guessing you're aware, and no doubt the audience are aware. The guy that betrays him at the start, not Alfred Molina, the other guy. Same actor who plays the eye patch guy with the monkey later on.
Really? I did not know that, actually. Yeah. Well, fair enough. That bloomin' monkey, the Nazi monkey. Anyway, that's it. So do you guys have any other thoughts on Harrison Ford, or can we move on to the next actor I want to talk about?
I just think he's great.
Awesome. Right. So the next character, or the next actor, I should say, would be Karen Allen, obviously, because for me, as I say, she's kind of as important in the plot as Indiana Jones to me. Certainly more so than any of the other love interests until her again in Crystal Skull, which I think is the one thing that movie gets right. Remembering her kind of agency and the importance of her character. And I'm kind of not loving the fact that they haven't got her in the new one, and it looks like they might have gone down the route of, they were married, but they got divorced or whatever because we don't want to deal with all of that.
Isn't it?
Yeah, but I have heard that she's not really part of the plot because they're doing the whole he's divorced from her thing, and I could live without that because I kind of do want to believe in them as a couple, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I'm not worried about the absence of Shia LaBeouf. Get rid of that guy. This podcast just turning into me hating on LaBeouf. I'm sorry. But at the end of the day, he made 3 awful Transformers movies.
You've still not forgiven him for that, have you?
Mainly the second one, if I'm honest, but yeah.
I wouldn't hold him responsible for that. It's more of a Bay problem.
There's some pretty dodgy acting. Anyway, I'll not get bogged down in that because we're talking good actors. So Karen Allen, as I said, not an actress who has worked nearly enough, in my opinion, but great in this, in the other indie movie, Crystal Skull, and great in Scrooged, which we might talk about one day. But yeah, I think she's so good in this movie because for 1981, she is quite a strongly feminist kind of character in a lot of ways and has her own agency. Like I said, sticks up for herself. She's able to drink anybody under the table. She brawls. She punches Indy when she first kind of re-encounters him. And yeah, it's just this. Or even funny moments, like she has such perfect comedy timing, like in the middle of the bar brawl, she stops to get a drink out of the leaking barrel that's being shot. That's such a small thing and so genius at the same time,
And the scene, Paul Freeman in the tent, she's amazing in that.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. That scene is great because it plays with all of your expectations because you're thinking, okay, she's playing him. No, is she really drunk? Oh, okay, cool. She's getting out of there. Oh, no, wait, she's actually not getting anywhere. So brilliant scene all around, but so well acted by everyone. And yeah, her in particular. Because she's never telegraphing it. And I will say this, I don't know if I've mentioned it before because I'm not sure if it's came up on any of the movies we've reviewed, but one of the hardest things to do is to act drunk and make it realistic and not over the top. And yeah. She manages it straight from the off.
Yeah.
But even little things like the way she's kind of uncomfortable with the monkey at first, or the callback, like I said, to the drinking contest, the way that she's trying to best Belloc in that. And the only complaint that I have is I was a bit uncomfortable with how much she just turns into damsel in distress during the market scenes, the market fight, because it seems like there's a solid 10 minutes of just Indy help. Oh no. And I'm like, oh, she's regressed for this one sort of scene. And yeah. And that's without mentioning the scene that I showed to you, DK, which I may have to see if I can upload as part of this. But the scene when Spielberg really should have had a retake because clearly he's told Ford and the stuntmen to be doing all this, and then just went, Karen, just, I don't know, hit them in the background with something lightly or whatever. And it looks so ridiculous. She's just lightly tapping these extras with a box for like a solid minute while Indiana Jones is having a fight in the foreground, and it's so distracting and so weird. So yeah. Anyway, enough about Karen Allen from me. What about you, Steve? What do you think of Marion? Other than obviously, presumably, you're a fan of the. You mentioned the seduction scene with the silk dress that she gets from Belloc.
I mean, she looks good in that, yeah, definitely. But no, I think you've already hit on a big part of it. Really, it's for a female lead. She does do it very well. She is, as you said, the damsel in distress. And certainly at that time when they were making movies, that was what the female lead was really there for. But at other times, she's fighting, she's drinking, she's firing machine guns, all that stuff that is so hard for them to do properly today without making them a bloke.
Yeah.
But it's actually a woman, and it's like, no, she's still a woman, but she's still capable of doing all of that. And it'd be nice to see that a lot more. And it's certainly something I'm hoping they don't cock up massively in the next movie.
Yeah, well, Phoebe Waller-Bridge is a good choice, I think, of somebody to try and step into that role as being, as you said, very feminine, but also kick-ass. So hopefully that might work.
I've heard a few people talking about possibilities, and I'm like, maybe. I've not seen her other work, so I can't really say what she's like.
Oh, I would. Well, you definitely have seen at least one movie. If you've seen Solo, she was kind of in that. So
not in a massive way for me to remember them.
Well, she was a voice. She was the voice of the droid, so you wouldn't have seen her.
Okay, I get that. So that was a bit. I'll hold my judgments.
But no, Fleabag is fantastic. Her comedy series that she writes and directs and stars in. So you should check that out if you get a chance. But anyway. But no, I mean, Karen Allen, going back to that, like I said, that's all of my notes, just that she's really, really good in this and everything I've seen her in. And as you said, Steve, you've already mentioned, like you said, being able to hold on to being feminine and being a love interest whilst also being as kick-ass as the guy, if not more so in a lot of ways. Pretty awesome. Yeah. DK, similar thoughts? Or?
It's interesting that you brought Phoebe Waller-Bridge up, because I think if Raiders were released today, the big just internet cries of wokeness, because Karen Allen in this such a strong character. Yeah, she does, as Steve says, she's got that feminine side, and I think you kind of need that in a leading lady. But she equally is kick-ass in this. I love it. I think it's a great role for her. I think Karen Allen is a severely underrated actor. I mean, she's in two of my favorite all-time movies, this and Starman. I'm not sure if you've seen that.
I haven't, but you should have.
Do yourself a favor.
You should have mentioned Scrooged. So,
well, you already mentioned it, and I know where that's going, so I'm not going to say anything more on that. But she's, and I don't think she ever got the due that she deserves.
No,
I think she's absolutely fantastic in this. She can easily hold her own with anyone else on screen at any given moment, and I think she was kind of the archetype for my choice in women growing up. Thanks for this.
That's a pretty strong claim to make.
Yeah,
I see what you're saying, though. Yeah, I mean, it's she's she's quite aspirational because you don't want to, as much as some people think that you don't necessarily want just a bimbo. And she can hold her own. So
not only can she hold her own physically, she's, yes, he's a professor, she isn't, but obviously she's picked up a great deal from Abner, her father. So in my mind, she's, as intellectually on Indiana's level as she is physically. And I think it's a really good partnership. And she even says it until that I'll tell you something else. I'm your goddamn partner. She's calling the shots a lot of the time. I do like that about her. I think she's just a great character.
And it does, to your point, it does make you wonder, would there be complaints if this movie was released today from the usual crowd of like, oh yeah, she's taking the lead, or it's all woke, the woman's having to, stand
I honestly think there would. I
think so as well, but it's just funny how these things kind of happen in the culture, as it were, that people don't, a lot of people that probably love this film would never notice that or wouldn't realize, but anyway, enough about that, because the final thing I will say about, what would make her the ideal, partner if she existed in real life, she owns a bar. So, that's all you need to know.
Exactly.
Awesome. That's great. So, any other thoughts on Karen Allen, or can we move to Ivan, who's next?
Go on.
Yeah, I find that baffling, because as the biggest, as you know, Power Rangers fan who's watched that movie 1,000 times, I only found out like a few weeks ago that Paul Freeman is the same guy that played Belloc in Raiders, which I've also seen a good few times.
I have to tell the listeners that I got a message from Mike on Messenger like a few weeks ago saying, he's Ivan Ooze. like the shocked face emoji.
Absolutely, yeah. And so now, watching it this time with that in mind, I was like, it's funny because the character of Belloc, I would say, is kind of pretty arch, and even has the whole "we're not so different" shtick, and would come across as over the top. Except I've seen, obviously, how over the top Paul Freeman can go. And to quote my own notes here, he never goes full ooze in this movie, I'll tell you that much. So in actual fact, despite seeming like a bit kind of cliche and over the top at times, it's surprisingly restrained from what I know he's capable of doing.
Yeah. He's very understated for the material that he has, and I think he sells it because of that.
Yeah, I do think he's still a little bit inconsistent, like I said, because you have, even within the same scene, the great moment of comparing how much he enjoys the rivalry between him and Indy, and then just, like I said, launching into that horrible stereotypical, if you were nudged a little differently, you and I are not so different, you'd be just like me. I was like, that's probably more the dialogue than him, but it's like...
You're kind of looking back on it now. I mean, this is 1981, and we've had 40 years of that kind of shtick from
true.
all corners. I see him less as a nemesis than a frenemy, as it were, a rival. And I think it works in the context of this. I think in a lesser actor, and again, like Karen Allen, I don't think Paul Freeman gets half as much credit as he deserves.
No, I mean...
And it's only through people that have kind of followed his career, like Peg, and, putting him in Hot Fuzz and stuff like that. Yeah, I think he's a really good character actor. And again, I'm sorry to be the cheerleader for the series, but he does turn up in another role in Young Indy.
Oh, awesome. And then he starred in the greatest movie ever made in 1995. So, kudos to him. Yeah, I'm not even going to pretend that's the case, though. See, that's what he should have done. Indiana Jones should have just got a giant robot to knee him in the balls. That's as simple as that. I'm going to let that one sit for a while. But so Paul Freeman as Belloc. What about you, Steve? Any thoughts on how he's portrayed?
I thought he played well. You've sort of covered a lot of it there, really. It was a good counterpoint to Indy in a way, really. Indy's obviously doing it for the prestige and always for the university. That was always his thing. Fair enough, he gets paid for it, but he gets the adventure of getting it and gets to give it to the university for all that prestige and for them. Whereas obviously he's out for himself and willing to use any resource possible to gain that prestige for himself, whether that's exploiting the natives or working with the Nazis and the rest of it. Yeah, he'll do what it takes to get the prize.
Yeah, because to your point there, it is interesting that he's not actually he doesn't clearly believe in the Nazi ideology. Like he's the one that puts, he kind of smacks back when the guy complains about, oh, I'm not comfortable with this Jewish ritual, and he's just like, well, it's got to be done, so get on with it,
Yeah,
and it's not that he has a loyalty to their particular brand or anything. You just get the sense that, like you said, he's a mercenary. He'll go wherever the money is, and
there's something to do that.
Absolutely, there's something fascinating about that type of character where you've got no morals one way or the other, but you're out for yourself, and that's fascinating to me. Could have done with a bit more maybe of it, but fair enough. Mm-hmm. Any last thoughts from you guys? Sorry, on any of the actors at all?
No, that's pretty much it, really. That I've got.
Yeah, we've talked already about Melina and John Rhys Davies and how good they are. Denham Elliott as Marcus Brody, I think, is generic, but he's fine. He's good. Better in Last Crusade, I would say. But
I'm going to dispute that. Really? I'm going to dispute that. I love Denham Elliott. I think he brings an extreme touch of class to pretty much any role that he was in. He was one of the best things about Trading Places. I love Marcus in this. I love Marcus in Last Crusade until a point, and then they just turned him into a complete raving loon. I love the serious Marcus, the Marcus that knows what he's doing. I appreciate the comedy elements from Last Crusade more, but I think they did the character a disservice by making him just a complete Fruit Loop, a complete inept. I think I love the little exchange between him and Indiana in this, and I like Marcus as a character. I just think they didn't do the character a good service in the end by making him a bit of an idiot.
Well, he's not got a lot to do in this movie, even with the scenes that you like, though. I mean, you would admit he's probably underused, if nothing else.
Oh, definitely. But you do take him seriously as a character. And when he says, if I'd have been a little younger, I would have gone after it myself. And that line's always played in my imagination, because I do think it would have been nice to see that. And the very fact that he said that obviously led me to believe that he was this type of character that, while not as physical as Indy, he would have been out in the field a lot more if able. So when it comes to the later movie, and they put, well, as soon as you drop him outside he even gets lost in his own library. As soon as you drop him outside his comfort zone, he's just a complete fool.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. That's understandable, definitely. But yeah, in terms of other characters, I only have a couple of things I want to mention. First of all, I always seem to forget the character of Katanga, and yet he's kind of fascinating because I love that he basically bluffs that he's a jerk and does so to try to save Marion and to basically save Indy by just saying, oh, I killed him. Don't worry about it. So he's kind of, even when you think he's not staying loyal, he is. And there's something kind of wonderful about that as a character, especially when you've seen the importance of keeping them safe that was imparted on him by Gimli. Sallah. So, I have to shout out, as I think one of our audience has in the interaction section, stuntman Pat Roach, who plays the bare knuckle boxer looking guy that Indy fights that eventually, comes face to face with a propeller. Really good, fantastic bit of stunt work, and he's been good in so many things. I don't love that he blacked up to do Temple of Doom, but you can see why they wanted to reuse him. He's a really good stuntman with a lot of skills, and it sells that scene for you. You always feel like Indy's about to get his ass kicked, really. That's it from me for the acting. But do you guys have anything at all about anybody else in the film?
I was going to mention Wolf Kahler, who plays, who's made an entire career playing Nazis.
Is that the guy that looks like Hair Flick?
No, that's Ron Lacey, who I'm going to bring up because he was also the president in Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai.
Good Lord.
Yes, Wolf Kahler. I mean, he was in From Eagles Dare, Where Eagles Dare and Force 10 from Navarone. And he was the go-to choice in casting roles for the Nazis. He is what he is. He's typecast, but I think he's always good. Ronald Lacey, I think, is fantastic as Tote, and George Harris, who you mentioned, as Katanga, and who you, Mike, will no doubt know from another movie that we'll be discussing quite soon. I can't fault any of this cast. I think they all play their roles brilliantly. I don't think there's a single actor in this that lets the side down.
Yeah, I can't think of one either. How about you, Steve? Would you agree?
Yeah, I'm happy with that as a statement.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair enough. So, as I said, the next thing that I want to talk about is the direction. Anything we haven't kind of touched on already for that. And again, Steve, we'll come to you. Anything that you've kind of noticed? Anything you want to call out specifically? You did kind of mention the opening stuff already, just to
Yeah, I mean that entire scene at the start is so iconic. Really,
Yeah.
It's been used in various guises and in a lot of different ways, and obviously the introduction of the character and things as well is really good. The dramatic music when the Nazis enter and things like that.
Yeah. Cool. That's fair enough. And what about you, DK? Any thoughts on the direction that we haven't already touched on?
Again, like as I mentioned earlier, I think this is Spielberg at its best. As Steve said about the opening, the truck sequence is fantastic. The map room, I still say, is one of the most atmospheric scenes ever shot.
Yeah.
And even down to little things like the Indy on the ridge with the silhouette, like in my Avatar when they start digging. It's a beautiful, beautiful movie from beginning to end. I don't necessarily agree with maybe one or two of the things that he cut, such as the sub thing, but it's small potatoes in the grand scheme of things. I just think it's a beautiful, beautiful movie. Even after all these years, and you know how most of it's done, and you know all the behind the scenes stuff, you can still sit there and just get wrapped up in it and forget that it's a movie. In my opinion, anyway, you just get carried along with it, and I think that's the sign of a great director.
To counter that, I would say that I kind of look on it as a movie, and I'm in awe of it on that level, on a director level, because I'm a huge fan of Spielberg, and because I notice things like the way he stages things, or the way that he gives things close-ups of focus, the use of zooms, the way things are centered in the frame, little moments. And to your point, there are scenes that have become so iconic that listeners, I sent DK off air a video of like all the Indiana Jones references in Family Guy, and it shows how iconic those scenes are, that they just copied them exactly. And there is a joke version of the propeller fight and the kind of guy falling over with arrows in his back at the start, or the map room, as you mentioned, all of these things, and yet they're so ingrained that Seth MacFarlane and whoever's animating them has copied exactly, because they're so perfectly staged that there's nothing you would change, and they became iconic. I think, it's a sign of real skill there. As I mentioned, I don't necessarily agree with some of the more gory aspects, including, as much as it was fascinating as a child, the whole melting, exploding faces thing, because it kind of comes from nowhere in terms of what the movie is up till that point, But yeah, I've learned to accept it over the years.
It is like the opening salvo in the term "fuck around and find out" kind of thing.
Yeah, pretty much.
The movie does swing a lot from a lot of like very serious stuff, violent, and then all of a sudden it's sort of just comical, which is getting taken off in a basket and all that sort of stuff. I think that sort of keeps it as more of a light-hearted movie, really, and especially with being a PG, I think. And especially with all the melty stuff, it might be a higher grade than that.
I mean, you can see how if very small cuts and a change of like framing and music would quite easily turn this into a virtual horror movie if you wanted it to be, even as you said, the things like the snake pit, which should be and kind of are, horrifying, and you're like, how are you going to get out of this? You also have the played for humor moments of them coming face to face with it, and just like the oh shit look on their faces is kind of amusing as well as terrifying, So yeah, I like all that.
To me, it says a lot that the fact that Spielberg looked at this as a B movie, and it still is so well done.
Yeah, definitely.
And no offense to Spielberg, I think in one or two of his later films, you don't get that, and I don't think I love Spielberg, don't get me wrong, but I think there's a level of care in this that isn't necessarily in every film he's done. So for him to label this as a B movie, to me, shows just how amazing a director he is.
Yeah, I can get on board with that for sure. And I think I wanted to mention quickly, this is probably I'm not as au fait as I sometimes seem with cinema history, but I think it's such a genius idea to have overlaid like a map of where they're going on the journey with the plane like flying to it. And I'm sure this probably isn't the first film that ever did it, but
Oh
it
no,
seems,
definitely.
yeah, but it seems like such an obvious thing that you wonder how many filmmakers just wouldn't do it and would, it makes such a difference to the feel of the thing that it doesn't just cut to the next scene and then go like a subtitle that says 15 hours later or
Yeah,
Peru. That
you actually
week,
feel like you're going on this journey with him.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I think technically, I think it's just really well done.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you, and I think there are times when it gets a bit slapstick, notably during the market fight, as I mentioned, but it's not that jarring. It's just it's annoying when a film is this close to absolute excellence, and then you just get one or two slight missteps. But again, it would be churlish of me to go too far into that because it doesn't ruin anything. It's just a little thing that pokes on me slightly, and that's about all I could say. But yeah, choreography, the fights, and everything, just gorgeous. So that's the directing in terms of my thoughts, and I'm guessing you guys probably don't have much else either.
I'm pretty much on the same page as you.
We've probably talked for long enough, but yeah, just quickly then to break it down, things we haven't touched on the VFX. I will say in terms of visual effects, there's not much, but I kind of do still like, even though it doesn't look great, the melting faces effect. Like it's obviously Evil Dead plasticine type stuff, but it works really well in tone, I guess, with everything. I think the sets and the props are gorgeous. They all look so well designed, but there is still some ropey compositing on the scenes with like lightning in the background, and it looks a bit, very 1981 in a couple of those scenes. And in terms of,
I love it. It's just the film's a mood to me, and I just think you can take one of these things. I mean, the melting faces, the clouds with the lightning behind them, the water tank. I just love it.
I can't disagree with you on that case then. So yeah, fair enough. And just to bring it back to something else, the music, kind of Steve already touched on it, but it switches nicely and sometimes jarringly between like slapstick fun and the adventurous romp motifs that they do. Most notably, the one that comes back at the very end during the top men moment, which I noticed is kind of played throughout. But come on, how iconic is that John Williams Indiana Jones theme? It's just so good.
Not just that. I mean, I remember I wrote. I think it was only a couple of weeks ago when I watched it as part of my marathon. The Matt Room Dawn track, to me, is one of the best pieces of music ever written. I think it's so atmospheric even now. Beautiful.
Yeah, it wasn't something that occurred to me as I was doing notes and watching, but as soon as you mentioned it back, it does live in the brain because it's jogged the memory straight there, and I'm like, yes, he's right, absolutely. And even though I didn't consciously register it, yeah, you're right, that is atmospheric, and it's fantastic. It's such a cool scene, the way it's staged, but also the music and stuff. But that's John Williams. But no, I've said it before, and I'll say it probably many other times, but come on, man, the sheer amount of iconic, brilliant music that John Williams has made. And yet, for me, apologies if you're a fan of anything else, there's probably, dozens, if not hundreds. But for me, I cannot separate in my mind quite often the Jurassic Park theme, the Superman theme, and the Indiana Jones theme. They are all so good. And yet, to imagine having one of those on your resume, let alone all three.
I would also add, obviously, you're not a big fan of the movies, but I'd also add the Harry Potter theme, Star Wars.
The Harry Potter one's iconic as a theme in itself. Yeah, I mean, Jaws, of course, and Star Wars. Yeah,
I know it was a flop, but he did the score for 1941, and that is always stuck in my mind.
Huh? I've never seen it actually, but I probably should, being a Spielberg fan. Yeah,
well, I might do that one for a cult one because holy shit, if there's an audience for that, it's definitely a cult one.
Yeah, all right. That's a definite possibility then for sure. So yeah, that's literally all of my notes, I think, until we get to the favorite character moment in line. So is there anything that we haven't touched on that you guys want to mention at all about the movie, or any last kind of thoughts before the breakdowns?
The plane at the start.
What about it?
It's a 2-seater plane.
And?
There's at least 4 of them.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think they've kind of established Indiana Jones was the only one leaving there. So they all kind of lived there, or they were just going to, they either lived there or they were just going to hang out, wait for another plane, I guess. I don't know. See, that's the kind of thing that would bother me in a lesser movie, but I just don't really mind in this. Yeah. But yeah, I guess you're kind of right, but it doesn't.
When you see it, you go, but that's it. Yeah, it's a two-seater plane. And one of the seats is taken up by a giant snake anyway.
Yeah, which just happens to be the guy's pet.
And then the natives who have the accuracy of stormtroopers.
I don't know. They killed that one guy with about 70 arrows in his back.
That's it. So blatantly, Indy obviously can speak their language and had arranged something beforehand because some of them are firing off into the trees. They could take, unless they were aiming for like a frog for lunch later on. I don't know because I'm sure they're really good with those bows.
We've done it where we've myth busted it. It was all a con. Indiana Jones was never planning on anybody but him getting back. He had the natives kill everyone else, and he was always going to betray Doc Ock. People are going to be so annoyed that I don't know that character's name. I can't remember.
It's a depot.
Anyway. A depot, is it? Oh,
a depot.
Yeah. Well, Otto Octavius is easier to say. So yeah, we'll come to the favorite character moment in line. Why not? We're kind of winding down. So we always go to our guest first. So Steve, who was your favorite character in the movie?
I was telling with the monkey actually.
The monkey's a Nazi. He's the only Nazi Indiana Jones is kind to. So
he's a mercenary.
He gives a Nazi salute.
That's a good point. And actually, the Nazi actually responds back to it as well. Exactly. To me as well. Character-wise, apart from obviously going Pat Roach as well as the guard randomly.
You just want to be obtuse, don't you?
Yeah. I'll go with Sallah.
The snake.
Yes, the cobra in the pit. Indeed.
But no, I heard you say Sallah, so we're sticking with that one, yeah?
That's it. He obviously pops up a few more times and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was nice to see his face in the trailer for Dial of Destiny. I kind of hope he has a better role than that implies, or a longer one at least. But yeah, John Rhys Davies is a great actor, man. How many people can say they've been in Lord of the Rings, Star Trek, Indiana Jones, Sliders, 1,000 other things.
Wow,
yeah. Awesome. What about you, DK? Who was your favorite character in the movie?
Well, it's got to be Indy. Character's now so iconic that it's 4 decades later and we're still discussing his first appearance. Obviously, I prefer Spielberg's iteration of the premise as opposed to Lucas. So, yeah, he stood the test of time. It's going to be Indy, definitely.
That makes sense. I personally can't really separate Indy and Marion because I think the best moments are when they're a duo in this movie, yet they are both separately great as well. Because you went with Indy, I guess if I have to go into my head, I'll pick Marion just to vary it a little bit and to give her a due.
I'm a goddamn partner, man.
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, no, I'll say Indy and Marion together, but if you insist on me separating them, I'll slightly pick Marion just to give her the credit that she's deserved and put her on the board alongside Sallah and Indy. So yeah. So what was your favorite moment in the movie, Steve?
Single moment. Can I just count the entire opening start?
Yeah, that's kind of the temple scene or whatever at the start. Absolutely,
that entire thing, because as we've already said, it's been used elsewhere so much in very similar things. It's such a great scene.
Oh yeah, the amount of times we've seen since then boulders chasing people and people reaching under closing doors for hats and whips and whatever else. And What about you, DK?
I was initially going to go with the truck chase, but while we've been speaking on reflection, I think I'm going to have to go with the map room.
Right, okay.
Photography, direction, soundtrack. They come together and now on perfect moments, hard to beat. And for me personally, in a movie filled with action set pieces, it takes something special to make a simple act of searching and discovering a location stand out. And so, it's basically the scene that led me to study archaeology myself. So yeah, I'm gonna have to go with that.
Yeah, and I mean, for a scene which is basically just a dude illuminating a model village, not bad.
Yeah. If you can make that look good, you're a good director.
Yeah, this is where I know there are so many great and, like I said, rightfully famous moments, and I love them all. I don't want to downplay them, but I laughed out loud once during this movie, even watching it now. I don't know why it never really stuck in my memory, and I'm sorry to all the other scenes, I have to go with the coat hanger gag, because I laughed audibly. It's just so freaking funny, the way it's played and everything. It was so, yeah, and I love the cheeky sense of humor that the film has at various points, and I think never more so than during that moment. It works really well for me, so that's what I'm going with. And yeah, we've given you time to think about it, Steve. So what's your favorite line in the movie?
I'm going with the arrogance of Marion. You can't do this to me. I'm an American.
Oh, there's something very familiar about hearing those words, perhaps. Yeah. That's a heck of a choice. And DK, what's your favorite line?
It's a bit of a cheat, this one.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go with the mirror scene on Katanga's boat. When she wipes that mirror down and smacks Indy and he lets out that yellow paint, only for her to say, you say something? There's never been a single time where I've watched this movie, and trust me, I've watched this a lot since it was released. There's never been a single time I haven't laughed out loud at that scene.
That is great as well. Yeah, definitely. Right. Yeah, my favorite line, I've already mentioned it, but it's definitely, and again, there's a lot of really great ones that I could have picked, but I went with, I don't know, I'm making this up as I go, because to me, that's the key mission statement of the movie. It's like, that's Indiana Jones's life. Like, he ends up in these really crazy situations. Half of the time he escapes through just dumb luck. When you look at it, really, and I just love that. He's not a genius who's confident that he's going to come out on top because he's just so bloody better than everybody else. It's just, he's just making it up as he goes along, just trying to plod through and get by. So I love that. Right. Yeah. Let me just move on then, because the next thing would be the audience interaction section, where we throw it open to you listeners and viewers to say what you think of the movie. We didn't get a huge response, but we have a few on Raiders of the Lost Ark, which I thought would be more popular as a famous movie, but never mind. So over on Facebook, mostly to DK, we have a few people who said things. Rick Cowling says, Indy makes little impact on the plot. Everything that happens probably would happen anyway. Wink. Yeah, we saw The Big Bang Theory. Roger Godfrey says, how did the bad guys get the Ark onto the submarine? It's bigger than the hatch. Cue the Joel gif. Robert Lunt says, Pat Roach and Damon Elliott, need I say more? Planes, sober Nazis, horses, wrath of God, smoking, indigenous tribes, mummies, snakes, dates, actors having the shits, and melting faces, to name but a few. What's not to like? A demonstration that Lucas is actually shit at scripts, but good actor and director can make magic. So, yeah. Where else have I got stuff? Over on Twitter, I had one response from Thomas Labernick, not a long one, but he just says, love it, great movie, action pace. On our Discord, Jamie or JA Productions says, the second best indie movie behind Last Crusade. It's a classic for a reason. It's fun, exciting, and it's got an engaging adventure. Yeah, and a few more just from friends of mine who contributed or chipped in. Michael Stark gives the movie 5 stars and says, this is a perfect movie. Senan Film gave it 4 stars and says, amazing Spielberg film, one of the best trilogies of all time, amazing music by John Williams as always. Clacker the Geek gives it 4.5 stars and says, I hadn't watched this in about 5 years, still absolutely fantastic, fun adventure stuff, incredible characters, great action, awesome music, intriguing mystery, over the top but brilliant gore, an ace lead with Harrison Ford, wonderful craftsmanship from Spielberg with regards to the set design, cinematography, etc., and overall, simply just so fun. Yeah, can't disagree with any of that. Michael Vincent also gave it 5 stars and says, I was unfortunately late to one of the best action-adventure picks of all time. Spielberg was so skilled back then that everything he touched turned to pure gold. Will Templar, who you will know fairly well from the podcasts over the years, he gives the movie 4.5 stars and says, it's got some problems on the whole, but the second half of the film is so exceptional that I cannot possibly be harsher than this. Brilliant. From a filmmaking perspective, this cannot have been made better. Perhaps some sharpened choreography, but still brilliant. Just brilliant. Right, so that's all of the audience's thoughts and what they had to say about the movie. So it's up to us now to give our own conclusions and scores. And again, we always come to the guest first. Stephen, are you comfortable giving us a conclusion and a score out of 5?
Out of 5, ooh.
Well, 5 stars. So yeah, I mean, you can give halves, or if you want to be as awkward as Sandra is, she often gives like 0.3691 or whatever.
I'll go with 5. It's a classic.
Awesome. And yeah, any other thoughts or just a classic?
You can put on any time for anybody, and that's why it's a classic. That's why it deserves 5 stars, really.
Yeah, I can see why you would say it. Yeah, it's also one of those films that I think you can watch on like a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon, and you know it so well that you don't have to necessarily focus. You can just kind of enjoy it and let it roll over you. It's got that adventure film vibe to it, which is it's always good. Well, we appear to have lost DK, so in the hope that he's going to come back and the technical difficulties won't last that long, I'll say quickly, but I'll give my conclusion and score. Conclusion won't be that quick. It's quite long-winded.
Sorry about that, dude. I don't know what happened.
That's fair enough. Well, I was going to give my conclusion because we were in the middle of it, so I may as well carry on, and then we can come to you for yours, DK, and hope that the internet holds out. So, like I said, apologies, it's a little long-winded. I said, firstly, let me say that I balk slightly at the common idea that this is a perfect, flawless movie, the greatest thing ever made. It's not even the best Indiana Jones movie, though it's close. It's not even the best Spielberg movie, though it's up there. It's not quite even the best Lucasfilm movie. But enough about what it's not. Let's talk about all the stuff that it is. It's Harrison Ford's best character and one of his best performances. It's wonderfully humorous with a love interest so well drawn she's practically a co-lead. It has a fleshed out world of believable, wonderful supporting characters. It's a near perfectly paced and edited thrilling adventure movie. It has directorial flourish in spades, iconic shots, set pieces, dialogue, action, and some outright genius plotting. There's almost no fat or wasted time, and in the age of movies becoming increasingly bloated, it's refreshing that it gallops along at exactly the speed of plot and clocks in under 2 hours. Okay, it's not perfect, but that's a high bar. Just because it doesn't engage me personally that extra mile doesn't mean I disagree with anyone who says it is, though. And despite my cheekily misleading intro, there's a level of mastery and sheer cinematic entertainment here that won't allow me to go less than my score of 4.5 out of 5. So, yeah, that's mine and Steve's thoughts, a 5 and a 4.5. DK, over to you. What your conclusion and score for the movie?
Well, first of all, I want to apologise to Steve. If I've done a lot of talking this time, it's only because I'm kind of passionate about this.
It's no problem.
That's okay. For Steve, he's actually been talking a lot. He's usually laconic. So.
I'll talk when I want to,
yeah. Mine, problems aside, for an adventure movie, I'm simply going to go with my letterbox review and say one thing: perfection. 5 out of 5.
Okay, fair enough. I'm now looking like a jerk as the only one that didn't go with a 5 out of 5, but hopefully understandable reasoning. But yeah, certainly we can add those together, divide by 3 to give us a final podcast score. Again, this has to be one of our highest scores of all time. Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, if you want to call it that, comes with a final score of 4.83 out of 5, which I think, yeah, very close to a 5, understandably so, and not something, as I said, that I would definitely dispute, although my personal tastes lean more towards Last Crusade. And so the last word has to go to that seemingly never-ending debate. I know there are some people that might be outliers that might like Temple of Doom just to be weird, or even weirder people like Lady Vianne, shout out if you're listening, who like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull for unfathomable reasons. Yeah, don't even ask. I don't know what she's thinking, but I can't even think about that. That's just too weird. But yeah, so the debate always, my point would be, comes down to Raiders of the Lost Ark versus Last Crusade, which is better, and it's gone back and forth a lot over the years, and I've even kind of flip-flopped on which one I think I prefer over the other over the years. So I have to ask you guys, you know my opinion.
I need to watch that now, actually. That is literally what I'm going to do tonight. I want to watch Last Crusade.
That's fair enough. Yeah, you should. It's good. Well, watch them all. Last Crusade is obviously where I would plant my flag nowadays, but what about you two? Which would you say is the best of the two? Steve, we'll come to you first.
Obviously, I'll just give your Raiders 5 stars, I'm going to have to watch Last Crusade to remind myself of exactly how good it is or not. I recall it being a good movie, though, so I can't really say. I'm going to watch it tonight. I might try and put a comment in there when you launch this video as to what my actual answer is.
Yeah, because you don't have a letterboxd or anything, do you? So you can just comment on the video. That's cool, right? I'm intrigued to know actually what you think watching it now after probably, like me, it's probably been about 5 or 6 years since you last saw it as well. So
yeah, it's been a while, yeah.
And, DK, do we even need to ask which you would favour of the two?
Yeah, weirdly enough, the only other one in the series that has 5 stars on my letterbox other than this is Last Crusade. I do think when I watch them in order, they flip, they change positions for number one. I do think Last Crusade is infinitely more rewatchable than Raiders, but as a straight adventure flick, I think Raiders just pips it, and I think that's kind of my personal favourite. But that could be because I've grown up with this.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely. As I said, the fact is they are almost inseparable, so it's a bit of a cheeky question, but I just thought it would be a fun way to end the episode. So, yeah, like I said, I wouldn't dispute anybody that said either one of them. Temple of Doom, less so, and Crystal Skull, Vianne's out on an island on her own with that one. I don't know what that's about. But anyway, so that would conclude this week's episode. Thank you so much to DK for bringing your passion, as always, and your clear love for the movie to this episode.
Thank you. I just love talking about stuff like this.
That's cool. Thank you, Stephen, for being here and bringing your own personal opinions and takes on the film.
Always welcome. Thank you for having me along.
Yeah, you're welcome anytime. And thanks to me for being here. I'll thank myself. Why not?
Before you fall down.
You can always find us via our various links on the social media sites and things that are on our link tree, which is always linked in the description of this video, or you can just look around and find us on the internet via our name, the Silver Screen Podcast. Steve, I'm pretty sure you're not really available anywhere on social media. Is that right?
I'm that mysterious, yes. You can find me on my own Facebook page is tough. And I've got just a big show.
You are an enigma of sorts, but I think that's why our audience loves you. Is this your first Silver Screen, by the way? Because I know you've done a couple of treks, but I can't remember if you've been on a movie one.
Yeah. Actually, when I was looking back over the format you did this, I found the Star Trek 4 one, the one with the wheels. The review we did of that. But yeah, I think it is actually.
Awesome. Well, we'll have to have you on again. You were good. And again, apologies if we've talked too much over the top of you and stuff, but I know you're a man of few words most of the time anyway. So. You're
professionals at this. You know the sort of things you want to talk about. I'm happy just to give a difference.
We're just obnoxious, mate.
We can be both. Yeah, but no, it's been great hanging with you guys and just chatting about a fantastic movie. So do come back and join us again when we'll hopefully be doing the same thing. I don't have my information in front of me to tell you when it'll be, but I do know it's going to be a little bit of a break while we focus more on the series that's currently running of our Star Trek podcast. Speaking of that, we're doing a Klingon-themed series over there at the moment. And while we wait to see if I can avoid a nervous breakdown with all of the work that I've been giving myself. But yeah, we will be back in, a few weeks. Oh, yeah, we will be back on July the 13th, but I won't be part of it. Will and George Poupart will be taking the reins of the podcast for the first episode without either me or DK. And they're going to be reviewing Mission Impossible Fallout ahead of the first part of Dead Reckoning coming out in cinemas. We should also have coming up a new cult review, which DK has alluded to several times, where we're going to be looking at one of my favorite movies, Flash Gordon. So do stay tuned for that within the next couple of months. And in the meantime, just keep an eye on our socials to see when we're going to be around. And if you are a fan of all things Trek, do subscribe over there and join us there as well. So that's that out of the way. DK, did you want to take over the reins and give our sign off for this week?
Yes, as the man said. I'll be back.
I'll be back.
You have been listening to the Silver Screen Podcast, hosted by Michael Wilson and DK. Created, produced, and edited by Michael Wilson. Behind the scenes sections and additional material produced by DK. Music by Timeless Journey. More information can be found at soundcloud.com/timelessjourney. Follow the podcast on Instagram at Silver Screen Podcast, or look for the Silver Screen Podcast under Facebook groups. Links to all our social media accounts and more are in this episode's description. This podcast is available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Just look for Silver Screen, Hit or Miss Star Trek. This has been a Mike's Podcast production. Copyright 2022. Thank you for listening.